Welcome to Lecture 3. In this lecture, we'll be opening a trace file using the drag and drop, which is a good little tip to know, and just regularly opening a trace file through the menu. We'll also be saving a trace file in a traditional PCAP-NG format. That's what WIRESHARK uses right now, and saving it in a non-trace file format. I'm also going to explain why that's important to know when you deal with other protocol analyzers and/or scripts. Start, stop, restart. Those are all great capture options to know under your belt. Restart is something people don't use very much, so I want to make sure I cover that very thoroughly. The status bar, how to open a trace file. When you capture, what does that look like in the status bar? Because it would be nice to know if you are capturing versus when you've stopped capturing and looking at a trace file. Capture file properties. This is a very important screen that people take for granted. You'll see why when we get there. Status bar in the bottom right. Again, something that is overlooked by most people who use WIRESHARK, which has a wealth of information. The WIRESHARK screen layout. When you first launch WIRESHARK, there's an open welcome start screen. It's been called all three of those things. And I'm going to point out all the various components of that screen. The time display options, I'm going to show you the most commonly used time display options and when and why to use them. How to set a time reference, same thing applies, when, where, and why. Sorting columns. Now, people will do this by mistake and then restart WIRESHARK to fix their problem. I'm going to show you how to intentionally sort your columns, and on top of that, how to back out of it. Manual name resolution. I've talked about transport name resolution and turning that off so you do not overwhelm your name servers with excessive lookups. And this is another approach that when you do have a bunch of IP addresses and you want to change it to a name for many reasons, which we will cover, how to do that manually. We also have the statistics menu. Now there's a lot in there, so I'm not going to cover all of them, but I want to cover the basics. There's an endpoint list, a conversation list, the protocol hierarchy, statistics, and the I/O graphs. Those are the ones we're going to cover. So this is all Lecture 3. Now when you've got a trace file that somebody sends you or you've captured in the past and you need to open it, there's the traditional way to open a trace file, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But the easiest way to open a trace file is if WIRESHARK is currently open, just simply drag and drop that file into WIRESHARK and it will open it. Now, just a few things. Make sure you only have one file that you drag on there. If you drag more than one file into WIRESHARK, you will merge those trace files, so don't do that. The other thing you can do is simply double click on the trace file and WIRESHARK will be associated with PCAP or PCAP-NG and it will open that as well. The only thing you got to keep in mind on top of all of this is if you had a trace file that was existing, it was already open that you're working on, you would have to make sure you save that trace file, and WIRESHARK will tell you that. It'll say, do you want to save this trace file before you open this other one? Please make sure you save the work if that's what you want. You don't want to have to lose stuff. The more traditional way of opening a trace file would simply go to File and Open, just as you would with any other Windows application, and you would just simply navigate to the folder wherever it happens to be and you would open that file from there. Now you also have the additional option of Open Recent. As with most Windows programs, you can see a list of the most commonly or recently opened files which you can pick from the list. Please pay attention to the color. If it's gray, that file is not found. Okay, it knows you opened a file, but the file has since been moved or renamed or whatever, but it's not there anymore. The black ones are there. If you want to change the way WIRESHARK looks for your files, then we covered this already under Preferences, Control-Shift-P or Edit Preferences. You can go to Appearance and you'll see it says Open Files in the most recently used folder or a specific folder, and this is where you control the number of recent files that it will display as well. Lastly, under Open Recent, you have an extra little option here at the bottom. This is relatively new, Clear Menu, and what that means is it'll clear the recently used list. So menu really is kind of misleading, but that's what it does. There'll be many scenarios where you're going to want to save your trace file and possibly in a different format, right? So here we go. When you go to File, Save As, you'll see obviously the regular stuff. Now, save as type. The latest file type for WireShark is PCAP, P-C-A-P, PCAP NG. You may be familiar with PCAP or CAP. This is the WireShark format. Now, if you need to save it in a different format for Microsoft's Netmon or an old version of Sniffer, that sort of thing, well, just go to Save as File Type, and there's a list of all the various formats. If your vendor is not on this list, just find out from that vendor what file formats they're compatible with, and then from there you can save it and then open it in there. For example, most protocol analyzers will open a Netmon trace file, a Sniffer trace file, or a snoop.cap trace file. Just be careful, because .cap really has no standard. Many different vendors use cap, but they change a bit in it. So if you don't know exactly what they're using, don't guess. You have to make sure you know what format they'll accept. Sooner or later, you're going to run into a scenario where you're going to have to save your trace file in a non-trace file format. So what I mean by that is text file or a comma separated value file. And those are situations where you're going to want to bring the data into another program like a database, a spreadsheet, a script, some sort of reporting program that will go through and parse the data for you. So to do that, it's not obvious, because most people go to Save As. That's where we were, and you can't do that from there. So you have to export packet dissections. I know it's a mouthful, but that's where you need to go. And you'll see the little extra pull down menu that pops up. It'll ask you what format to put it in. So the important thing to keep in mind as you go through this is, again, you need to make sure you know exactly what format you need. And if it's a CSV format, it will save it in the format that you currently see on your screen. So if you have a certain column format on your screen, that's exactly what it's going to save it as with a CSV file. So if you do have a script or a macro in Excel, that sort of thing, please make sure that you know exactly what format you want that in, so you don't run into problems a little bit later. So this may seem like the obvious stuff we need to know about WireShark, but there's a few catches you have to watch as you go through this following slide. So the first thing is, if you notice with WireShark, when you start it up, you'll see a blue fin and a gray box. Now this is in the top left-hand corner underneath your menu. So you can see File, Edit, View. It's over there. Now when it's gray, that means that it is not capturing. It's not running, so to speak. So when this fin is blue, it means it's waiting to run. It's idle. It's not doing anything. But when you are capturing, the fin becomes gray and the gray box becomes red. Now there's one third little thing, and that is this guy on the side, this other fin on the right hand side of the square. It was gray before when it's not running, and now that you're capturing, it is green. So, little review. When you're not capturing, all you see is the blue fin. The other two icons are gray. When you are capturing, the fin becomes gray and these other two icons become red and green respectively. Now, if you don't want to deal with the buttons like me and you like using accelerator keys or shortcut keys, there's a really neat little thing. Now, Control E is a very popular one that people can remember because that's end. So when you are capturing and you do Control and the letter E at the same time, you stop the capture. E for end. That's easy to remember. Now, what people don't remember or don't know is to start a capture, it's Control E. It's the same button. So Control E will end, Control E will start. It's like a toggle, if you will. So on, off, right? Start or stop, that sort of thing. Now, the restart button is a funny little guy. If you hit start and you're capturing and you said, oops, I made a mistake, I need to recapture again. Now normally you would hit stop, then you'd hit start, then WireShark would say, would you like to save your trace? You'd say no, and then off you go to the races. But if you want to skip all that, you just hit restart and it will automatically stop and start the trace without asking you to save the file. So as long as you don't want to save your data, the restart button is very efficient. It's a great way to start and stop the analyzer. Now if you did want to save that data for whatever reason, then do it the old-fashioned way. Stop, save, and start. Or Control E and then save and Control E after that. So now we're looking at the status bar when you open a trace file. So if you take a look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see these three items, which I've put numbers beside. So number one is a colored circle, and that's going to indicate the highest expert information level. And now that's a mouthful, but all that means is that WireShark has a database of all your packets and what it considers to be a problem. So it's going to tell you things like retransmitted packets, lost packets, that sort of thing. And this is all related to colors. So yellow is a marginal issue that it considers a marginal issue. Red would be an error, that sort of thing. And it's an FYI, and we will cover this a little bit more later, so I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but this just refers back to that expert information database. Number 2, little pencil with a icon. That opens up your capture file property screen, and this is where you can enter comments or notes concerning your file. So things like what VLAN are you on, did I use a monitor port, did I use a TAP, ticket number reference of the problem you're working on. In the past you'd had to write up a Word document or use a text file and make all your notes in there and hope you don't lose it, but now you can put all of that in the trace file, and that way you don't lose your notes. And the last is obvious. It's going to be the file name of whatever trace file you are working on right now. Now the status bar when you are capturing packets. So it's going to change this a little bit. Same thing. The colored circle still indicates that highest expert information that I told you about a moment ago. So the pencil and paper will do the same thing. It'll open up that capture file property screen where you can put your comments or any notes. Now this one's different. 3. It's telling me the name of the adapter that you're using and the note. And the note in this case is live capture in progress. So it's telling you that it's actually capturing. So if you are looking at a WireShark screen and you're not sure if it's actually running or not, because there's many different ways of running it, you can actually pay attention to the bottom of the screen and it will tell you that. Now if you hit stop capture, you'll notice that that changes. And now it gives you this big long file name. This is located in your WireShark temp folder. That may be totally different than your Windows temp folder. So I'm going to show you a little bit later on where you can find out where all these files are being held. Now as far as the capture file property screen goes, you can see that there's a lot of technical information we can actually reference when we look at the trace file. So the hardware, the operating system, the thing that you use to capture it with, obviously the duration, this was 2 minutes and 23 seconds, that sort of thing, the date and the time. So all of this stuff is really helpful. Now you get some additional stuff down below here that you probably want to pay attention to. Dropped packets. So I got a really simple rule for you. If that drop packet is ever greater than 0, then I strongly encourage you to use a different method of capturing, a different tool, the command line, operating system, different operating system. Just don't trust the trace file, okay? Because you want that drop packet to always be 0. Capture filters, again, we're going to cover that. It says none, so on and so on and so on. Now, all of this is contained within that capture file properties screen. So you can add your notes here and it goes with the actual trace file. There's no separate file now. It's all within the trace file. Now lastly, the status bar. The bottom right, you'll see there's a profile, which we talked about. We created a profile called troubleshooting earlier. It's going to tell you the load time. How long did it take to actually load this trace file? It's showing me the number of packets in my display filter. So in this case, 75 packets remain after I did a display filter, which is 0.8%. And lastly, the number of total packets captured. So just want to do that again. So this is the total packets I've captured. In this case, there's 10,000. There's no comma delimiter there. You got to just kind of spread it out with your eyeballs. Displayed is the number of packets remaining due to a display filter, not a capture filter, a display filter. In this case, there's 75. We have the load time. How long did it take WireShark to open this file? And lastly, the profile that you are currently using within WireShark. So for this slide, I'm going to do something different. I'm actually going to show you a working example, which you can follow along. So here we are. I've got WireShark. This is the start screen. I'm going to go to my Wi-Fi adapter, double click, and now I'm capturing a bunch of packets. See, there they all are. You can see here in the bottom, the packet counter is incrementing, 36, 39. It doesn't take much. Your machine's probably doing something in the background. And when you're done, I'm just going to hit the red stop. I could have also used Control E to start and stop as well. So a little bit about the screens. So obviously we've got our icon toolbar. We've got our menu up here. Over here, this is called the packet list. The top one's called a packet list. This is called the packet details. So if I click on packet number 5, now it says number 5, frame 5. See that? 9, 9. So this is called the packet or frame detail. So this is telling me the details or the guts of whatever we highlight in this packet list. This bottom screen is called the packet bytes. The packet bytes is the same second screen right here, this detail screen, but this is all the data in a byte or hexadecimal or ASCII or EBCDIC, whatever format you want. It's showing you that in a format. So just a few things here. Number one, I can move my mouse. See as it changes right there, right between those two panes. I can resize. See that? I can resize, right? I can also go to view, and you can see packet list, details, and bytes. So I can turn off the bytes. It's gone. I can turn off the details. It's gone. And I can also put them back on if I want as well. All right. So that's just a little navigational thing that you can follow along with me. You can hit pause. You can try it out yourself. But I just want you to be familiar with the 3 panes, that you can resize them, and that you can turn them on and you can turn them off. So time display options. Again, I'm going to go back to that trace file we just had a while ago. And I want to explain to you, if you go to view, time display format, here's all your options. Now, number one, there's all these little shortcut accelerator keys if you want to just jump straight to those types of format. But I want to explain to you when and why to use certain types. So the first one is seconds since previously displayed packet. That's one of my favorites. So I'm going to click on that. So the time now is telling me the time, for example, this one, that's the time it arrived after that first packet. Now the first packet has nothing compared to, so it's always 0. Now I want to explain to you these numerical formats. So this one, for example, 0.079809. So how do you say that? Well, the first decimal is seconds, which is 0. The next 3 digits is milliseconds. So this is 79 milliseconds. Then the last 3 would be microseconds, 809 microseconds. So this one is 239 microseconds. This one down here is 83.461 milliseconds. So we use this a lot when we want to find out why things are slow. Well, you need to define what slow means. Is slow a minute, an hour, a millisecond, a microsecond? What is that? So you need to be able to quantify when people say it's slow. So that's the first thing. View, time display format, seconds since previously displayed packet. We want to use displayed because if you ever put a display filter on it, then it'll still give you the correct time of what you see on the screen. So we don't want to get into the nuances between capture and displayed right now. Just leave it on displayed for a moment. The second thing is milliseconds. I want you to come all the way down here to go to milliseconds. Why? Well, I found with my testings that Microsoft, their NDIS driver, is only accurate till about 1 millisecond or so anyways. So I don't want to see microseconds, because if I ever get to that point of my analysis where I'm dealing with microsecond analysis, I probably want to get a hardware-based analyzer, something with a little bit more accuracy and horsepower, rather than using my everyday laptop for that. So here's a little trick. If you ever see this, 0.000, you'll say, oh, that's 0 seconds and 0 microseconds, so it's 0. No, 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 no. Don't say that. This is less than 1 millisecond. That's how you say this properly. And don't get into the micros because it's not going to be accurate anyways. So that's just a little bit about time display options. Now, the other thing you may want to consider is the seconds since beginning of capture. And that's like a stopwatch format where it starts with 0, then 1 second, 2, 3, 4, all the way through the trace file, which we're going to use a little bit later on when we do a time reference, okay? But in this case, we just want to look at seconds since previously displayed and milliseconds. Now this, by the way, before I leave, these time display format settings will be remembered in your profile, which should be troubleshooting. Now, setting a time reference. This is a very powerful tool when you need to calculate the time between a command and response, for example, and they're not right beside each other. So you've got a command, you've got about 10 packets, and then you've got a reply, and you need to know how long that took, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever. So the best way to do that is time display format. Again, view, time display format, seconds since beginning of capture. Again, I strongly suggest you use millisecond format. Then the key here is you right click on the packet, the get packet or the command packet that you want to work on, right click on it, and you'll see a menu, and you want to choose set time reference, and it's a toggle. So that means if you do it again, you remove the time reference. So please be careful when you use the option. Once it turns on, once it turns off. And when you do that, you'll actually see REF, and that means your time reference is set. Again, if I want to get rid of that, I right click, set time reference, and that goes away. So from this point onwards, the time will increment, and this is my 0 point, if you will. So you'll see right above this one, it's at 8.2 seconds because that was before that point. And then I set my reference, and now it doesn't continue with 8 seconds. It starts at 0, and then it goes on from there. All right, sorting your columns. Now this is going to sound a little odd, but you will do this if you haven't already. You've probably done this by accident. So this is a real trace that I've got up on my screen from before. And now if I was to click on the destination header, something's going to change. Now I want to show you something first. There's my frame number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so on and so on, okay? So I'm going to click on this, click, and when I do that, you'll see there's, I don't know what your eyes are, there's a little up arrow. Now I'll do it again, and now you get a down arrow. See? So it's sorting, in this case, by destination IP. Now look at your frame numbers, 23, 25, 28, 29, 30, 4, 2, 6, that sort of thing. So if you ever do this by accident, you go, oh, look, it's all messed up now. What do I do? And then some people will literally go exit Wireshark, start Wireshark, load the trace file. No, if you want to go back to the way it was, just click on the number, and there you go. So why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes you want to group visually all the, in this case, the resets, maybe get commands, maybe the certain IP, you want to see who's talking to whom. Maybe a protocol, you want to look for a certain protocol, like there's SSL versus TCP. So whenever you want to just group things together for a moment, that's what you do. And then I'll say, hey, look, I'm looking at packet number 36. So I'm going to sort this back by number, click. See, 36 is still selected. So now I can look around 36 and see what's going on. So that's sorting your columns. Manual name resolution. Now, we talked about Wireshark can learn your host names by either inspecting the packet payload or querying your name services. Now I've asked you to turn that off in your preferences, which you'll see down here at the bottom of the screen, and here it's turned on. So I've always asked to make sure this check mark is not there, right? This is because of that. So now if I have my IP addresses and either I don't want to reveal the public IP addresses or I just don't want people to see the IPs, better yet, people don't know what the IPs are of the servers, they might just know the names. So you might want to put names instead of IP addresses. This is how you do it. Right click, edit, resolve name. This bar will appear at the top of the screen, so you really got to look carefully. It'll very subtly appear. And it'll say name resolution preferences, there's the IP address, and give it whatever name you like. In this case, I called it client, and then click OK. If it doesn't work, it doesn't look like it worked, you'll have to go back to your preferences, Control-Shift-P, or View Preferences, and then from there, your name resolution, you'll see Resolve Network IP Address. This has to be on for this to work. So you start off with it probably not being there, because I've asked you not to have it on, but if you want this to work, you need to make sure the check mark is there. Just remember, you got a check mark on, so if you start capturing packets, same stuff applies as always. If you don't want to bother your name servers, then take the check mark off. The statistics menu will have a whole bunch of stuff, so we are only going to touch on just a few of the most common reports you're probably going to want to use when you first start using Wireshark. There will be an intermediate and advanced course that I'm putting together, which will explain all of the options that you probably want to use. But just to start, you're going to go to Statistics, Endpoint List. So you'll see a few things. At the very top here, you'll see some tabs. There's Ethernet for all the MAC addresses, IP for the IP addresses. You know what? Let me just bring up a live. Here you go. Statistics, Endpoints. So there's our endpoints. So this is a list of all the MAC addresses. Now, for whatever reason, if you want to see the names of those vendors, like Intel, Aris, that sort of thing, you could turn name resolution on or off, okay? IP address. Now, these are all the IP addresses, obviously, and because I don't have name resolution turned on, right, you see it's kind of grayed out, and they're just IP addresses. But the nice thing about this is I can sort by IP addresses. So this is a list of all the IP addresses that I've captured from my machine that I'm talking to, and obviously talking back to me. IPv6, right? Now a little note, you see it says Ethernet 2, that tells me there's 2 addresses under that tab. IPv4 15, there's 15 addresses. IPv6, nothing. There's no number there, so there's nothing there. TCP, there's 30 TCP connections, and UDP, none. So this is simply a list of addresses. That's what the endpoint report is. It's just a list of addresses, either MAC addresses, IP addresses, or TCP ports, that sort of thing. And that's all it is. Okay. Now I'm going to close this. And statistics, and this time I'll go to conversations. Now this is the same thing as an endpoint report, except it tells you whom is talking to whom. So in this case, there's only one conversation, whereas the endpoint report gave us 2 MAC addresses, just blindly said there's 2 MAC addresses out there. In this case, I know these 2 are talking to each other, right? So that's the Ethernet IP, all the IP addresses that are talking to each other, so on and so on and so on. So just a little tip. If you want to filter, you see something, oh look, there's 12 packets here and there's only 2224 in there. What's going on with this conversation? Well, you can right click, apply as filter, selected, and I want both ways. There's an arrow pointing both ways. If I only want it one way, I can do that as well. A is pointing to address A, and there's B. So you can actually filter one way or both ways. I'm going to do both ways. And when you do that, I'm just going to close this for a moment. Now I have a display filter. You see that? And this is a filtered trace file now. So out of 41 packets, I only see 12 right now. That's what it's telling me. 29% of the packets are being displayed. So that's the endpoint, the conversation list. Now I want to move to the protocol hierarchy. Protocol hierarchy. Let me just bring them over your screen. So statistics, protocol hierarchy. And this gives me a list of all the protocols that it heard on the network. So this is really important. So if you do have IPv6 on your network and it's not supposed to be there, you can make sure it's not there. You can make sure old IPX protocols, SNA, NetBEUI, DECnet, all those protocols are gone if you want. If there are certain protocols you want to monitor by protocol, like DHCP, there's a whole thing behind that we're going to cover. But right now, this is just a list of all the protocols. And again, if I want to filter on just TCP, right click, apply as filter, select it. And now if I close this, you'll see up here it says TCP. See that? So that is the easiest way to get comfortable with the statistics report. Lastly, there is the statistics IO graph. So the IO graph is pretty cool because it's going to show me graphically what these packets are actually doing. In this case, you can see there's a display filter here called tcp.analysis.flags. It tells you if there's any problems. Okay, and then this is all packets, and this is packets per second. You can also do bits per second, bytes per second, whatever you want to do. We're going to play with this a little bit. But right now, all you need to know is statistics, IO graphs, and it draws a really cool graph of your packets.